You have a dream, so that's going to be your speech. That's not plagiarized, all right. Nice work. Okay, so I want to talk to you about how to write this constructive speech. Because the constructive speech, as I've said before, cannot simply be a copy of your affirmative summary. It must be different. And speeches are different from essays. They obey different rules. So I'd like you to take a look at the example that we have. The United States federal government should illegalize smoking. I'm going to read this aloud to you. I'd like you to follow along. And as you're following along, I want you to think about this question. How is the speech different from the summary? How is this speech different from a summary? In other words, what is this speech doing that I probably would not let you do in a formal written paper? I'm not breaking rules here. There's a different set of rules. So these are white sheets. These are yours to keep. I'd like you to feel free to make notes on them. If you want to note anything that you feel is different, please do so, and I'll ask you questions about that. So, looking at the example. On February 9th, 2010, First Lady Michelle Obama initiated Let's Move, a campaign to end childhood obesity in the United States. Let's Move doesn't just want to make children thinner. It wants to stop the incidence of heart disease, high blood pressure, and asthma afflicting obese children. On April 22nd, 2009, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, activated its Emergency Operations Center to combat the H1N1 virus, which had begun to sicken and kill weaker Americans. The CDC led the search for a vaccine, and during the fall of 2009, millions of Americans were protected by that vaccine from a disease which had reached pandemic proportions. What do these two cases share in common? Why, on a day when I am supposed to speak to you about smoking, am I talking about obesity and the swine flu? Because both of these cases clearly show the responsibility the federal government bears in protecting public health. In the preamble to the Constitution, our founding fathers wrote that they intended to provide for the general welfare. Today, that means using our resources and our laws to protect against health threats, like the greatest health threat of them all, smoking. Smoking remains one of the most serious threats to public health, more serious than obesity or the swine flu, and the United States federal government must take serious action to end that threat. It must illegalize smoking throughout the United States. Let me give you some facts. According to the CDC, smoking causes approximately 443,000 deaths in the United States every year. That's about 1 in every 5 deaths. Smoking increases the risk of heart disease and stroke 2 to 4 times. It increases the risk of lung cancer in men 23 times and in women 13 times. Smokers are 12 to 13 times more likely to die from chronic obstructive lung diseases like bronchitis and emphysema. Smoking's harmful effects are not limited to the lungs, though. It harms nearly every organ of the body. And, of course, these effects are not limited to smokers. Those who regularly breathe the smoke exhaled from a smoker, known as secondhand smoke, suffer as well. Secondhand smoke increases the risk of heart disease in non-smokers by 25 to 35%, and the risk of lung cancer by 20 to 30%. It causes an estimated 46,000 heart disease deaths and 3,400 lung disease deaths among adults annually. Worst of all, secondhand smoke produces 150,000 to 300,000 new cases of bronchitis and pneumonia in children, leading to 7,500 to 15,000 hospitalizations annually in innocent children who never have a choice on whether to smoke. Smoking is killing men and women, young and old. It is a more serious public health threat than any other we face, but we can stop it. Over the past 18 years, state governments across the nation have passed smoking bans to protect their citizens. As of July of 2010, 23 such states have enacted these bans, and now they protect a vast majority of American citizens. According to a Gallup poll from 2000 to 2008, as these bans increased dramatically, national smoking rates have dropped from 25 to 21%. Now, the smoking bans may not have caused that drop by themselves. After all, smoking rates have been steadily dropping from their high of 40% in the 1970s. But smoking bans have helped this drop in rates. As these state bans increase, fewer Americans smoke and more Americans become opposed to smoking. A federal ban would take this positive momentum and sweep it across the nation. The nation has worked hard to warn about the dangers of smoking and encourage people to stop. That work is about to pay off. If we illegalize smoking throughout the nation, our work will come one step closer to stopping this health menace that has killed more than any terrorist attack ever could. Not only should we do this, but we must. There you go. Yes, Jasmine. Okay, hold on one second. So we want to talk about the differences. And let's review very quickly. Remember what the constructive speech has done. You should remember my affirmative summary, and you should see shades of it. What do you recognize from my affirmative summary, Josiah? That's right. I discussed the Constitution. However, in my summary, it was a more analytical discussion of a longer stretch of the preamble. Here, it's just a quick reference to it. But I did bring some of that. Anybody remember anything else? Yeah. No. I mean, anything else you remember from my affirmative summary? Remember the example I gave of an affirmative summary? But that's not in here, right, Jake? Yeah. Correct. Okay, so there's differences, but I'm looking for similarities right now. So hold on one second on the differences. We'll get to you. Sarah.
When you talk about lung disease and
I've included those statistics in my affirmative summary. I've also included the statistics about smoking bans in the affirmative summary. So some of the evidence you see is the same. However, there are some significant differences, and let's go to that now. Jake started one. I see no formal in-text citations according to MLA format. So no need there. However, let me ask a question. Have I cited research? Josiah, how have I done it? Why would I want to do that, Josiah? Why would I want to say according to the CDC? What does that gain me in a speech?
According to this company, you're saying this company says it kind of gives you, it makes you sound more authoritative.
There you go. That's perfect. No in-text citations, but authoritative references. I still want the authority of the CDC, but I've got to do it in a different way. I must actually say the CDC. I've got to say Michelle Obama. I've got to say whomever. What else is different, Jasmine?
I said how, like, in some of the sentences you spoke, it seems like you spoke speaking directly to those people.
I use first and second person voice. More. What other differences do you see? Especially if you see something that you think I would mark off points on a formal paper. Sarah.
You kind of like wrote like as if you were talking, like said, let me give you some facts.
Yep. Anybody else notice the mark of informality in here that would definitely lose you a point on a formal piece of writing? That's true, the rhetorical questions. But I was thinking of something a little bit more nitpicky in terms of style that some of you have stopped doing since the beginning of the year. Connor.
You're kind of more dramatic to it, less straight to the point than you would want us to do.
Connor's correct, more emotional. The answer I was looking for, by the way, before was the contractions. Do you notice that I use contractions? Contractions are a hallmark of an informal voice, which I do not allow you to use in your formal writings. Jake. Did I include a fragment? I could see myself including a fragment in here. Where did I include it?
That's about one in every.
Nope. That's a complete sentence. That is about 1 in every 5 deaths. I've used a contraction. However, we still have a subject and predicate, so it's still a complete sentence. Any other differences that you notice? Connor?
I don't know. Did you use passive voice?
Yes. And I don't believe that I did. Sometimes you want to use passive voice, Connor. Sometimes you don't. But it's definitely acceptable. So you see a number of differences that you've identified. Let me clarify those differences. We're talking today about rhetorical devices. Rhetorical devices are tricks of speaking to connect to an audience. Ways in which a speech is different from a regular paper. Paper, I've got to read. Paper's sort of a forced audience, right? So researchers have to read papers, teachers have to read papers, students have to read papers. There's force. There's no engagement there. But now we're talking about speech with engagement. So let me give you some rhetorical devices, and you might want to write these down because I would expect that you would use some of these in your writing. First of all, shifting voice. You've already noticed it in my speech. Shift from third to first to second person. I use all three. I want to humanize myself and make my audience believe that I'm speaking to them. Let me give you some facts. What does that do? Josiah. It's almost conversational, right? It's just like, hey, we're talking. Let me give you some facts. You're putting the audience at ease. You're speaking in a first and second person voice. And it's conversational and it's informal. An attention-grabbing device. You generally want to make the speech easily accessible from the beginning. Have you learned about attention-grabbing devices before? What can you use? What kind of facts or statistics? Not all of them work well for attention grabbers. Well, then it should be solidly hammered into your head. Come on, which facts or statistics work well? Unusual or shocking? Something that shocks and surprises your audience. Yeah. I'll let Mr. Carr know that you blanked on that, Josiah. Calls to action. Audiences tend to take notice when you tell them to do something very directly. Do this. Don't do this. Stop this. End this. Be this. Appeals to emotion. Don't just make people think. And you guys, Connor was on top of this with the speech. Don't just make people think, make them feel. When you're writing a summary for me, you're writing formal paper for me, I don't need to feel anything. I just need to see your brain working logically. That's all I want. With this speech, I want to feel something. I want you to attempt to make me feel something. So appeal to emotion. What feeling? I don't know. Joy, envy, sadness, horror, shock, despair. Depends upon your topic. You've noticed my rhetorical questions. When I ask you a question, what does your brain automatically do? Try to think about the answer. Whether you can come up with the answer or not, your brain turns on and you try to think. Which is why I sometimes do call on students unsolicited and ask them questions, because I want to turn on their brain. And even when they don't have the answer, it turns on that brain and that thought process. So I'm making my audience think.